few months ago, I saw On the Basis of Sex, a movie about how Ruth Bader Ginsburg won a landmark gender rights case by arguing that a tax law discriminated against men. Hey, Al Capone's reign ended because of taxes, female equality began because of taxes. Just as important as her legal career to the story, the dynamics between Ruth, her husband Marty, and their daughter Jane are also explored. Ruth and Jane had a tumultuous relationship while Jane was growing up, because the similarities in their personalities constantly set them on collision courses. After a particularly brutal fight over an English paper, Marty comforts Jane and tries to explain that Ruth's words came from a place of love, which prompted me to think of how my own dad would have responded, and then to reflect a little bit on our relationship in general. And you know, I came to a shocking and satisfying conclusion. A conclusion at all. For years, I struggled to define our relationship, sort of like Billy Ray and Miley Cyrus. But you know, after copious amounts of sitting, staring blankly forward, nodding off, and then waking up to start the cycle again, I think that I can put our relationship into words. I'm never going to have a close relationship with my dad, at least close in the way that I would like. But in our own convoluted and aggressively uncommunicative approach, we understand and respect each other. My mom and my dad met in 1986, a wild time for the world. The Challenger exploded, the Oprah Winfrey Show debuted, and the Bears actually won a Super Bowl. But in spite of this, I feel like for my parents, the whole falling in love thing was probably just a little bit more important. They got married in 1988, had my sister on the tail end of 93, my brother in 1995, and me in 01. Somewhere in the middle of this, they bought the house that we've inhabited for the past 20 years. And you know, this is all really idyllic in that classic and traditional sense. Let's just give a shout out for that American dream. But up until about 6 years ago, my dad was a fairly serious alcoholic. Again though, still shouting out that American dream. Addiction generally takes a toll on relationships because it is a little bit difficult to bond with your family when you're hooked to the bottle like drugstore dialysis. Needless to say, I found it a little bit difficult to connect with my dad while I was growing up. Normal to me was tension tighter than a rubber band pulled taut. Constant fighting between my parents, who by this point were only married in the sense of federal documentation, not knowing if my dad would be coherent the next time I saw him, the whole kit and caboodle. Don't get me wrong though, my childhood did have a lot of traditional aspects too. You know, watching SpongeBob, playing with the neighbors, falling through window wells, etc. My dad stopped drinking when I was in 6th grade, but by this point, the damage had already been done. Personally, I like to compare it to a Black Friday sale at Best Buy. You know, you have that limited window of time to get in and get out with exactly what you need. But if you get in line just 5 minutes too late, the only thing that's going to be left in that entire store is to knock off Tickle Me Elmo at the corner. Nevertheless, my family situation did improve after my dad stopped drinking. The drama settled, and the fights became less chaotic and more sporadic. For me, this describes most of what I remember from my childhood, and most of what I experience now. The obvious strain and marriage and stabilized shambles, but general calm. For my siblings, however, their memories of my dad's drinking are suffused with the recollections of his anger and volatility. My siblings' memories are so diametrically opposed to my own that in trying to incorporate their emotions into this piece, I felt more like a biographer rather than an actual character in the story. Their emotions were so opposed to my own that I couldn't possibly understand it, and it actually reminded me of how I felt when I visited this Magritte exhibit at the Art Institute. I spent 5 hours staring at these paintings, pretending to understand and to gain new wisdom about humanity. But the entire time, I was just humming the background music to Avatar: The Last Airbender in my head. Trying to understand my siblings' perspectives has consisted almost entirely of the question, don't you remember insert XYZ event? And my unfluctuating response of, nope. My memories of my dad drinking come from ages 6 through 10, so every memory that I do have is tinged with that ambiguity and unreliability that come with being young. I remember my dad being very quiet and passive if he'd been drinking, you know, just sort of pottering around. My siblings' memories comes from ages 13 through 17. They remember his verbal abuse a little bit more clearly than I do, such as frequently insulting my sister and exhibiting irrational anger at just everyday existence. In trying to understand their perspectives, I was trying to incorporate in their ideas and see how my dad's emotions weren't just evoked when he'd been drinking. For my siblings, however, they remember that his more substandard qualities, such as his passive aggressiveness, his pessimism, his short temper, those were around regardless of his state, just with a looser and meaner tongue if he'd been drinking. And from what I remember, he was mostly the same person regardless of this, but they help me to understand that he remembers that as well. But the thing that bothered me is that as I verified the perception and as I got older, I saw what they meant. I saw that he wasn't some Russian nesting doll with a new and better version of himself hidden just a little bit deeper inside. But the funny thing is, rather than being irritated that he wasn't ever going to be a decent dad like Marty Ginsburg, I was more irritated by the fact that the similarities in our personalities, because of the persistence of his personality, forced me to recognize that we do share those similar characteristics. For example, we're both very pragmatic people. But in my case, pragmatism isn't a dictator, whereas it severely restrains my dad and doesn't allow him to enjoy the minutiae of everyday life. His hyper-focus on practicality removes any sense of imagination he could have, and he never expresses any sort of creative passion. Who knows, maybe he did have those qualities, but having kids just drained his soul. We are also both intensely invested in the things that pique our interest. For example, he enjoys repairing cars and reading National Geographic. I myself enjoy BBC deep diving and watching Oprah. For him, though, he struggles to relate to activities when they don't relate to something that he himself is interested in, and consequently, he shows no interest in such activities, like playing games with his kids. We both enjoy talking about National Geographic together, but he has never once expressed interest in anything that I have written, including this. But despite all of these things, my dad does show support, just in odd and really small ways. For example, one time I was up late studying for a math test, and he poked his head into my room and asked what I'm doing. I respond without looking up from my textbook, because I'm very respectful in that manner. He says, "Well, you're doing anything way beyond anything I did, so I think you're doing all right." And he just closes the door, walks to bed, and then gets up the next morning to lecture me about how I ran the car over the grass again. My relationship with my dad isn't ideal, because my dad is far from perfect, but I'm a Mother Teresa myself. Yes, childhood probably would have been a little bit easier without wondering if he was passed out on the couch, but who am I to judge? I fall asleep on the couch all the time too. So Dad, I know that you're not in the audience, but I'm okay with that. Even if I wanted to exchange you for a different dad, eBay has really clamped down on buying people over the internet, so I'm stuck with you. You understand machines better than people, and I think that that's enough for us to keep a relationship going. If in the future someday, when I've graduated college and I'm living on my own, if my washing machine breaks, you'll be the first person that I'll call.